Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Workers Podcast. Today, we're so happy to welcome Sue Longley. She's the General Secretary of the IUF. Sue, thank you so much for being with us.
I'm delighted to be here and to have this opportunity to speak directly to our affiliates here in Antigua.
Excellent. Now, I'll start by asking you to just share with us a bit about the IUF, the International Union of Food. And there's a long list of sectors and industries that goes along with that. But of course, you could tell us more about the IUF and their objectives and work.
Okay, so happy to do that. And it is a horrible long name. And it is the International Union of Food, Agriculture, Hotels, Restaurant, Catering, Tobacco, and Allied Workers Associations. And maybe also a little bit of the history explains that long name. So the IUF was formed over 100 years ago. In 1920, and at that stage it was when bakers, brewers and butchers came together and formed the International Union of Food Workers. But since then it's grown. We brought in the tobacco workers, then the hotel workers, and the most recent was the merger with the agricultural and plantation workers in 1994. And at that stage the name changed to this very long name. And actually, maybe some of your listeners could think up a better name for us because that's something we're supposed to have done. It is very long, but basically we represent workers from plough to plate, from farm to fork, as we often like to say. So in agriculture, food processing, and then right through to workers in hospitality who serve the food.
Excellent. Now, taking into consideration some of the major shifts that have been happening in the labor market, how has the IUF really been able to adapt and evolve and remain relevant and effective?
Yeah, you're right. It's a very fast-changing sector. I mean, we sort of survived COVID, and then you're also already seeing new and very fast-changing conditions. And in particular, we're trying to understand the impact of increasing use of digitalization, new technology, but in particular, artificial intelligence and what that will mean for our sectors. So I think for us, if we look, so agriculture is still very much essentially a manual job, but we're seeing also new technology coming in there in terms of application of seeds, application of chemicals and how that's changing, but not that many changes. I would say the big change in agriculture is the move to more and more outsourced workers. So whereas a big farmer or a plantation owner would have had directly employed workers, now they bring in contract labor to do things like spraying and harvesting. And that presents more challenges for us as trade unions about how we organize those workers when there's this multiplicity of employers there. So agriculture remains one of our big targets. Food processing, we see maybe that's the sector that is already being affected very directly by artificial intelligence and changes in automation. So quite skilled jobs are being replaced by robots, and helping our unions to be able to negotiate that change, to make sure that the workforce has the skills for the future is very much the focus there. I think for us, and for again, very important for the Caribbean, when you also see those changes. I've worked with the IUF for a very long time. When I first came to the Caribbean, it was to work with unions representing workers in sugar and bananas. Now sugar's there, but on a few islands, no? Still there, important for the rum sector, but really not the same production that you used to see. And bananas more or less disappeared.
Correct,
from the Caribbean. So what's replaced it? Where have those people gone? And we see there that hospitality is an increasingly important employer, whether it be in hotels, restaurants, different forms of hospitality. But that for us is really where we want to work with our affiliates around the world. But in particular, I would say in the Caribbean, where the sector is now so important in terms of employment, but to help unions to know how to organize in what is sometimes a new sector for them. We're seeing that with our affiliates in Guyana, how they're responding there. but also how we can draw on the experience in the Caribbean to help other unions to know how to organize in what is quite a challenging sector.
Now, just to draw back a bit on some comments you made about the impact of automation and artificial intelligence, what is the advice coming out of the IUF to unions on this subject matter?
It is a real challenge, and I think sometimes actually even starting with very basic things like what is, you know, what's the difference, what's new technology, digitalization, automation and artificial intelligence, because sometimes people just read something and it scares them, and people don't like change anyway. No, we're creatures of habit, I think, on the whole. So really building the understanding of what it's going to mean, I think, is important. But then looking where the change will come. I don't think it's just going to be a doomsday scenario, that there will be no workers in the future, that will all be replaced by robots. I don't see that as being realistic. So I think for us it's building the capacity of unions to know what those changes will be and to start to negotiate them. And I think it's really important that we use the opportunity to see what new skills will be required, and that we help negotiate with companies how you upskill those workers. I do see quite a lot of potential. So for instance, we've done a lot of work over the years to encourage women to come into the workforce in all sorts of positions. And one of our big breakthroughs was actually in Pakistan, where there are a lot of challenges there for women to enter the workforce. And we were able to work with a major drinks manufacturer to get women trained as forklift truck drivers and to bring them in to the factory. But now if you look around, those will be some of the jobs that will go. I've been into factories where you have one person on an iPad controlling all of the forklift trucks. It's not humans anymore. But you know, what skills will those young women coming in want? Where can they go? We know that packaging and those sort of jobs will go. So let's think forward. What skills will those women want? How do we talk with their families, their communities, to see these will be good jobs for young women coming into the workforce? And I think working around understanding automation, understanding the impacts of AI, also gives us the possibilities to bring new young workers in to the workplace and into the union, and also to give more opportunities to young women who might have been excluded from formal education and not had the possibility to build those skills.
So then unions have an incredible role to play in helping workers to navigate these transitions. And of course, automation and artificial intelligence will not be the last transition in the workforce, correct?
I'm sure, yes.
We have a very important role to play. So let's come back to gender, as you touched on briefly. I know that the IUF has been a major advocate for women, as you mentioned. Let's dive in a bit more on that. Tell us about the work being done there in that area.
Happy to do that, and of course happy and very honoured to be the first woman General Secretary of the IUF. I told you we're over 100 years old, so it's taken quite a while to get there. But I was very honoured to have this post. And I think I see myself as a product of the work we've done over many years with our affiliates to build the capacity, to encourage our affiliates to look at how to bring women into the union, to make sure things like, you know, when you have a branch meeting is gender sensitive, if women have to go home, and still often the primary carers in the home to look after kids. So bringing women in, and then encouraging women to run for leadership positions in the unions has been very much part of our training program, and we've run that around the world. So still looking at women's employment and what we need to do, but as we've done that, I think women have also come forward with the challenges that they face in the workplace, and often it's been over things like equal pay. I think now in many countries there's usually a legal framework that will forbid discrimination within the same job. But
thanks
now
to unions.
Thanks to us, yeah. Now we're looking also at pay equity. Women still often in the lower skill, lower paid jobs, and what we can do to challenge companies around pay equity.
But does that vary from region to region?
I would say not. I would say that it's still very much a global phenomenon, that often women are in the lower skilled, often more precarious jobs with shorter term contracts and things like that. So looking at pay equity is one of our sort of global commitments. But I would say the other, and maybe a more challenging thing to work on, but I would say in particular, but not limited to hospitality, we've got a very active program, often with companies, but often just messaging through our affiliates, that we'll have, we want zero tolerance of sexual harassment in workplaces. We're very active supporting this new International Labour Organization Convention 190, on elimination of gender-based violence in the workplace. But it is a challenge. I mean, there have been very high-profile cases around sexual harassment by famous people in hotels, and the hotel trying to sweep that under the carpet. So for us, that's been a real, I would say, driver to be more actively engaged. And we have had some quite good response from the industry itself. So with 2 Spanish hotel chains, and I think they're becoming more active here in the Caribbean. One is called Riu and one is called Melia. We have a commitment there to work together around zero tolerance of sexual harassment. And with Riu, it's in fact some of our most progressive language, that they will also take action against a customer who harasses staff. In the past, that's been quite difficult. It's always the customer is right sort of approach. But they are happy with us to give very strong messaging to customers, that customers will not be allowed to harass staff to the extent where they would ask people to leave. They would throw people out of the hotel if there were cases of sexual harassment. So it's still a big challenge also in the restaurant sector, the hospitality. We know it's there, but I think there's a real interest to work on the issue, and also to work, and I should have checked this before we started to discuss, we encourage our affiliates to lobby their governments to ratify this Convention 190 on elimination of gender-based violence, so that there's also a legal framework in country. And I could look here to my colleague Chester, but here in Antigua, I remember last time when we were here, we just got the news that Antigua and Barbuda would ratify the convention. And that's an important tool for us to use. So again, that's one of our priorities globally, to get unions to campaign and to lobby their governments to ratify.
Mm-hmm. So what then is your general assessment, particularly in our region, of the progress made as far as gender and particularly sexual harassment in the workplace? What is your assessment?
I mean, I think people sometimes underestimate the power of the unions in the Caribbean. I think you've still got those old historical links that come a little bit out of the struggle for independence in the region. And so there's quite strong political leverage here in the region, and our affiliates have been using that. I think the level of awareness of the issue is good. And today we've just actually been talking about, as these new chains come into to the Caribbean that we have the agreements with, that gives us, I think, it's always a challenge, but we have the agreement, the company is committed to it, we have unions here wanting to work on the issue. So I think that's a win-win in terms of all concerned, that we can really push that sort of agenda, and then the message gets out wider than just that chain. So I think there's real interest and capacity here in the region to work on the issue. I think it's an acknowledgement that it is a problem, but I think we'll see some good wins in terms of effective implementation of agreements to have zero tolerance of sexual harassment.
Excellent. Now let's shift a bit and start a conversation on young workers. What is the IUF, what has the IUF been doing to support young workers?
So in 2017, we actually established an International Young Workers Committee, and the representatives on that committee are also on our other governing bodies. So in particular, the committee that oversees our budget and our policy priorities. And I think that's important, because quite often you can say you're committed to something, but if you don't put your money where your mouth is, it's just nice words. So our young workers do have a say on budget and the allocation of funds for their work. So the committee meets once a year, and it decides its sort of policies and priorities. So we're really looking at still what we can do to encourage affiliates, to look at how they bring more young workers into the union. And again, I think the Caribbean's doing quite well when I look around our affiliates. Actually, when I see the faces at the table changing, there's still some of those old guys who've been there forever. But that's the union movement. That's changing, huh? Nature will make sure it changes if we don't. So it is really a priority for us. And again, it's the hospitality sector where we focused on that. We're looking at what we can do in fast food. That is a really tough sector to organize in. You know, there's this churn of workers as they come in and out of the sector. But it's the sector, I would say, that's really dominated by young workers. So our young worker organizer is here with us today to look at what we can do to strengthen capacity around young workers. I think for me, if I was a young worker, the most annoying thing would be to be told, you're the future of the union. No. You're the now of the union.
Correct,
if we don't change now, there's not going to be a union movement in the future. Indeed. So for me, really sort of getting over that message, ensure we have a commitment in terms of resources to do activities with young workers, to bring them in, is really important.
What can you tell us about the main challenges and vulnerabilities that young workers are exposed to in the industries, the sectors that the IUF works in?
I think for me, and I would say though it's in a number of sectors, it's what we would describe as the precarious nature of their work. Often, I mean, in my own country, in the UK, you know, we had this problem with 0 hours contracts. When workers don't even know what hours they're contracted to do, they get a message on WhatsApp or whatever saying, you know, come in tomorrow, do this many hours. How can you plan your life like that? You know, how do you budget? How do you know you can pay your rent? So that's really one of the extreme forms, and I hope there'll be progress on that under the Labour government in the UK. But that precarious contracting is very common. We've also seen, for instance, and I don't know the situation here in the Caribbean that well, but a lot of delivery riders for food. You know, coming out of COVID, we see that people have kept that habit of ordering food online. You know, that's really, I think, been a change in consumption. So they call one of the companies and get the food delivered to their door. And actually getting the classification of those workers, you know, the companies will say, oh, they're not our workers, they're all self-employed, they come in to do all of this sort of work. And often that can be quite dangerous work. There's been a number of instances where those, you know, drivers are under such pressure to deliver quickly that they take a risk, that there are accidents. So looking at how we can get those directly employed and their recognition that they are workers has also been one of the issues. But yeah, a lot of things in that sector to work on. But the precarious nature of the work, not clear contractual obligations, I think, is one of the challenges for young workers.
Okay. Now, as we wind our conversation down, what message would you have to union activists across the globe as to how they can do their part in protecting workers' rights and advancing the workers across the globe?
I think that's, you ask that question at a really serious and worrying time. I mean, I think the other big challenge that we face is the growth in the far right and extreme movements around the globe. I think we all watch with despair the US election results coming in. But again, in Europe, we're seeing, very similar things happening, that far right governments are coming in, and how we challenge them, how we actually make sure that workers' rights are not rolled back. I mean, in addition to our young workers, we also created in 2017 a very active structure for lesbian and gay workers. We know they will be at the front line of the attack under this sort of fake family values thing of the right. And I think we also have to accept that many union members will have voted in many countries for the right. So where are we failing? Why are we not getting our message over that no matter what these people are claiming, their agenda in the end will be anti-worker, anti-rights. But I think now we need to look at how we mobilize to defend workers during what will be a very challenging period.
All right. Sue, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us. And of course, I'll throw it back to you just for any last words, any final words that you'd like to add.
I mean, when I come here to this region, I am continually inspired. I think people think, oh, the Caribbean, you know, just for holidays, just for relaxing. But because I've had the pleasure of working here for many years, I think the Caribbean unions have got a lot of experience in very challenging and changing circumstances. And a lot of the bigger unions around the world could really learn from what goes on in the Caribbean. So I'm absolutely delighted to be back here, to be with our affiliates, and to be able to show other unions, you know, we've got workers here from Asia Pacific, from Africa, from the US. Don't underestimate these guys. These guys know what they're doing and you can learn from them.
We're so happy to hear that. Thank you again for being with us.
My great pleasure. Thank you.
We've been speaking to Sue Longley. She's the General Secretary of the IUF. On this episode, we have with us the IUF President for the Hotel, Restaurants, Catering and Tourism Trade Group. Her name is Ronaldine Burgess. She's also the Vice President for the Caribbean region of the IUF. Let us welcome Ronaldine Burgess. So happy you could join us.
I'm happy to be here.
All right, so tell us a bit more about the HRCT, that particular section, that particular trade group within the IUF, and what are some of the concerns, the priorities, and the challenges that we're working within that particular sector?
Okay, that particular group, it says HRCT. It actually covers hotels, restaurants, catering, tourism, agriculture, beer, that all come underneath that particular umbrella. And as I said, we educate, we organize different trade groups underneath that banner. We did cut flowers with our affiliates in Ethiopia, in West Africa. We're doing education and organizing. And in Asia, it's farm workers. It's a host. The challenges that we see sometimes is that it's reaching some of the people that are definitely in rural areas. It can be a little bit difficult. Financing could be very difficult for some of our people in Asia and Africa, because although we have a number of affiliates under our banner, not necessarily are they all at sometimes able to pay fees, affiliation fees, dues, etc., because their workers are low paying. Some of them we might have what we call in India, there's a women's group affiliate, and they are farm workers and low paid, and they're self-employed, but they come underneath our banner as well. And so, like, if you even look at some of the goods that you might get over into this part of the world from there, it's low cost, but it might reach over here where it's a high cost, that they are actually paying for what they done over there. So those could be some of the challenges. And then there is lots of harassment going on in the workplaces in those particular areas. Sexual harassment can be, and gender inequality as far as pay and etc. So we have our work cut out for us, but we're making inroads because people are now beginning to be more forceful, more vocal, and knowing that they have the IUF support, it's a great help.
In the area of sexual harassment, because that is an issue, as I've been made to understand.
And the ILO has made it a convention now, and it's hard to believe that we are still having this conversation, because we know sexual harassment has been for a while, but then you have, let's say, it depends on the culture as well, because some words may mean nothing to us, particularly. I mean, let's say in Bermuda, we are used to saying, "Hi, honey," but that could be offensive and considered sexual harassment to someone else. But even still, women workers that go into workplaces are being bothered, or even males are being bothered by other people, that they are now being harassed. And I find it personally hard to believe that in this day and age we are still having people making unwanted gestures
Yeah.
towards one another, and that should not. You should respect somebody's privacy.
So we have the ILO Convention 190 that's helping with that as far as we can get them to be ratified.
Yes, we're trying to get it now enshrined in
Yes.
collective bargaining agreements.
Yes.
So when you come to a place of employment, you handed your collective bargaining agreement, you know there is now a sexual harassment policy in place and it's
Yes.
enshrined in the collective bargaining agreement. So we abide, management abides.
Excellent, excellent. And are unions able to include these clauses in their collective agreements? And how successful, rather, have unions been in including these provisions in their collective bargaining agreements?
Some areas it's going along very good because I think management is beginning to become aware that there's retribution, and if it's coming from the ILO standpoint, and then governments now put it into law, which has happened in Bermuda, is now a law. So the success comes because now we say it's the law, it has to go in the CBA. So
But that's the challenge that we're having here in Antigua. It hasn't been maybe ratified, but it hasn't been incorporated
Right.
into local legislation.
and that's the hard part because it can be ratified, but it's not necessarily adopted. Like we have people that go to the ILO, they ratify certain conventions, but do they adopt them? If we went and looked at ratification versus adoption, you'll see very little countries do adopt some of the laws that are done at the ILO, and they are part of these.
Okay. Now, let's talk a bit about your role as the Vice President for the region. What are some of the priority areas that the IUF in the region will be focusing on for the next few years?
For the next few years, right now we're the IUF in total, we're looking at, for the Caribbean region in particular, because we are a tourist eccentric area, Marriott is making inroads into our islands, and Marriott is very anti-union. We've just gotten one in Bermuda in the last 2 years. We had one previously, they left, and now they've come back. And we are struggling to organize because of, let's just say, a previous anti-government regulation, something. But we see it happening, not in Antigua, because Chester has total control of this situation. But that is one of our main focus. This is just not to the Caribbean specifically, because it's worldwide. Marriott is, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in the USA, the battle is on against Marriott to organize. And then when they're franchising out certain places, and you see the Marriott, but not necessarily is the Marriott Corporation.
Okay.
It's a franchisee that has Marriott, but they adopt this very anti-union stance with us. So that's one of our focal points right now. And also with fast foods, you have the KFCs, the McDonald's. I don't know which ones are here, but KFC is one of the major ones in the Caribbean region. So that's also, but they hire a lot of young people, and young people today are very impatient. If it's not what they like, they're gone. So we think we're organized, and we've got a niche that if it takes too long, they're gone. So we start all over again. So fast food, Marriott is one on our radar. Yeah.
So the hotels, are hotel restaurants, catering, tourism workers particularly more vulnerable to abuse and violations and exploitation?
Yes, they are somewhat. I mean, I always say that whoever really remembers their hotel housekeeper, the lady that cleans your room, sometimes they can be seen as invisible workers. That's what I classify them, because even some of my friends, I have to educate them, because we can go out to a restaurant and the way that I see them treat a waiter or something, they say that's not correct.
Yeah.
They don't like that, but that's not correct. Like, we were actually eating and one of them's bagels in the way, said, move for the waiter. They just said, look, he'll make a way. I said, no. He's not going to make a way. You're going to move the bag out of the way. So sometimes you don't respect the job. I mean, we minimize them and say they're in this category and we're in this category.
Yeah.
When you look at the whole equal, because it takes a certain amount of expertise to carry so many trays, so many plates when you're waiting. To me, housekeeper's job is probably the most important job in the hotel, and it is definitely the most difficult. They suffer the most musculoskeletal diseases than anybody else. If you ask the hotel housekeeper what happens to her at the end of the day, are you taking Advil? Are you taking Tylenol? Are you taking Bayer? Are you using gels to? She'll probably tell you yes. And you ask her pain, because remember they're doing repetitive work on a daily basis and cleaning up to 14 rooms or more a day. So they have the challenges, and we just need to make sure that people are seen and they are respected for the jobs that they do. Like Martin Luther King said, if you're going to be a street sweeper, be the best street sweeper you can, because we need them. We need them.
What can you tell me about the participation of women in unions throughout the region in those trade groups? Because in some cases, they form the majority of the workforce.
They do. Because when you look at it, especially if you're talking about hotels, but even now in agriculture, there are beginning to come more women. And women have one thing in mind. This is what makes them so strong. They gotta feed their family. They keep, that is their focus. That's why they get up every morning. And they go, so the women's participation is getting stronger. I mean, I mean, if you look at Sue is right now is our General Secretary of the ITF, and that was the first time in I think 50 years when Sue assumed the role of the General Secretary of the IUF. So women's participation is most important because they are the voices when you look at it. They are more emotional. You know. So, and they believe in fighting, because if they're fighting at home, they're gonna fight for you outside.
Okay. Now, as we wind down our conversation, what are your words to union activists out there, young union activists out there, and as far as what they can do to make a difference, to advocate for workers' rights and their protections and the advancement of and progress of workers? What are your thoughts, your words of advice for someone who is considered a leader in the union movement?
I'll say this to them. I never saw myself in this position. I really didn't. My mom was a trade unionist. She was our general secretary of my union for 50 years. At 86, she just retired this year, believe it or not. Officially retired. And that was why I always said I would never go into that business, because we knew the sacrifice that we had to make as she was a single parent of 5 children. And we knew the sacrifice because we were the sacrifice at times as well, because you know you don't see it. So if you're called to serve, you serve, because we all have certain talents. Some may be a singer, some may be an actress or whatever. But once you are called to serve someone else, do it with the best intentions that you have, because you are looking out for someone else's interest. And if young people want to get into the labor movement, remember, it's the sustainability. Countries, GDP and whatever, the standard of living in any country is basically set by a union. Because if there's nobody out there demanding that you have health and safety, that you have pensions, that you have rest, that you have vacation, that you have sick pay, who else is going to be standing out there saying this is what we need? So it's for young people to come along now to make sure that unions are sustained, unions continue, because the country depends on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Burgess, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us here.
And let me say one thing about this union. This union and my union have a connection. Our leaders have always been intertwined. I was so glad to see Bolden Spencer yesterday, who's very familiar to Bermuda, and Keithlin Smith was another one, very familiar. Our leaders have always intertwined. I remember when you had a hurricane here, our guys came down here to help and everything. I was telling Chester yesterday, it's just one left that was one of these persons that came down to help you rebuild the union and everything. So this relationship is tight.
And enduring.
That's right.
We're going to keep it that way.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us in Antigua.
Yeah.
And of course, for spending time with us here on the Workers Podcast.
Oh, thank you. And congratulations. You guys are just doing fabulous.
Indeed. Thank you again.
Thank you.
You've been watching and listening to the Workers Podcast. Thanks for joining us for this episode. And do join us again next time.